All right. So for today's Heartbeat episode, I've got Erin Gibson come on to have a conversation with us. And Erin kind of got a little bit of a mark when she stood up in City Hall and had a long conversation with our city councilors on some of the ideas that she has about the issues that we're facing as Calgarians, Albertans, and across Canada. So far the link that we've put up with her talk has gotten over 150,000 views on Twitter. So I thought, with that much interest inside of somebody that's quite young in age, uh, to be getting that kind of attraction and hitting some really high notes for what a lot of people wanted to see and the comments that we'd seen, I thought it'd be a really great time to have her on for a conversation. So we had this planned once and it didn't quite pan out. So glad to have you on, Erin. So why don't you take a couple of seconds and just introduce yourself to everybody, where you're from, who you are, and what's kind of got you into the to the political world inside of the province.
All right. Thank you, Sheldon. Happy to be here. And I'm kind of your average Albertan girl. I was born and raised in Airdrie and then moved into Calgary in my early 20s and kind of had a lot of odd jobs in the service industry and things like that, which was kind of an interesting experience in regards to the education system, just because I saw a lot of young people that it kind of like the before and after. So how they were before they entered college or university, and then how they would behave after they came out of that and sort of that transition. So working with people in the service industry and experiencing that kind of gave me a bit of a unique perspective on education. um, I was also homeschooled from grade 6 on. So I attended regular public school from K to 6, and then my mom could actually see some indoctrination happening in the curriculum even way back then. um, so she ended up pulling us out of school in regards to that, as well as some bullying that was taking place. We know that that's a huge issue and a whole another conversation. But that was part of her reasoning behind pulling us out of school. So I've got an older sister and a younger brother, and all of us went into homeschooling. So my sister, really, where I gained kind of the interest into all of the politics and specifically into the way that like Marxism and Maoism are affecting Western society. That was kind of introduced to me through homeschooling when my sister was in grade 10. She read the Communist Manifesto as part of her curriculum. And I just remember discussing a lot of those ideas and that ideology. And that's something that they did used to teach in public schools, but they've removed that. And so that just made me curious about why. And I just had a different perspective on things like Marxism and Maoism than my peers who attended public education. So that was kind of the introduction point um, into all of this this deep subject, I guess you could call it.
So, and that's really interesting because I did read through one of your posts that you were homeschooled and you had two other siblings that went through the same thing. So, how much different or how much older in age or what different grades were you guys taking that your mom was kind of going through all at the same time?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting the way that they do the homeschooling. One thing that's really nice about it is they kind of gear it towards your interests, and I wish that they would kind of introduce that a little bit more into public schools. So we could kind of choose our own curriculums, and then there was even better funding for homeschooling when we were growing up than there is now, type of thing. But um, yeah, so my sister is 2 years older than me, and then my brother is 4 years younger than me. So a bit of a difference in what we were learning, but because I was introduced to some of the things that my sister was learning a couple of grades ahead of me, that ended up putting me ahead of my peers. They would do kind of an equivalency test for us, to see where we were at with our learning abilities. And in grade 10, I was doing college level education projects and things like that. So it kind of gives you the ability to work ahead. Um, and one interesting thing is that you don't spend a whole lot of time doing homeschooling, which kind of made me question things in regards to public school too, because kids are in school for 8 hours a day type of thing, and the actual learning that you're doing doesn't take that long. In homeschooling, we were doing 2 or 3 hours a day, and again, I had a college level education in grade 10. So it's like, what are they doing with all this extra time in school? Like, what's the point of that?
Yeah. I, I mean, it's a long time ago since I was in school, but no, it did seem to be a lot the same. Is that you sat through an hour worth of class to get 15 minutes worth of actual knowledge packed in there some days.
Hmm. Hmm.
Some of the sciences were different. Do you find yourself
Yes.
behind in any subject, or really not so much?
There are certain things I would say it's just I have a different knowledge than my peers. They learn different things in school, and so I guess it's the same level of reading and type of things like that we were doing, and mathematics and things like that, but just different books that we were reading. So it's kind of interesting because when I talk to my peers, they'll talk about something that they learned in school, and I'm like, oh man, that's really interesting. I didn't actually learn that in school. So it's kind of neat how there are some big differences in regards to what you're learning. And again, I think there's the ability to do that with homeschooling, where you can kind of pick and choose, and kind of gear your what you're learning towards your interests as well. And it's nice to be able to do in public school. I kind of feel bad that, like you said, you've got to sit through these hour-long classes to gain 15 minutes of knowledge, and it's kind of an unfortunate process that kids are put through today.
It is unfortunate, but there is a large part of that being socialization.
Yeah.
Just going out. Now, you continuously mention your peers. So throughout homeschooling, you were able to maintain friendships and relationships with other children in your community and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents had us in, because for the time that we weren't actually learning in school, we would have to do extracurricular activities to gain credits type of thing. So we would be in like swimming classes or soccer or basketball or things like that, and that would count towards our education credits. But we also were able to maintain friendships and get socialized that way. And then we did attend church, and I was part of the worship team and children's ministries and things like that for a while. So all of that gave us an outlet to be able to do that. And I think also because I was introduced to public school at a younger age, that might have helped the socialization aspect. I mean, it's tough to say because I because my experience is a bit unique, but yeah.
No, that's I think it's cool. In seeing what is coming out of schools these days, and the thoughts that people are sharing, it's a lot of what you were talking about. Uh, in your presentation in front of City Hall, is that, and I think that the biggest point that you'd made that really kind of resonated with me is that people are basically coming into this state of mind where owning property is not a good thing. It's no longer viewed as value. And I remember having
Mhm.
some of these conversations, and this was, I think 6-7 years ago, and I was on Reddit for like 12 minutes because what a shithole that place is. Um, no,
Love it.
it's completely leftified. Unless you're like really
Mm.
anti-conservative and pro NDP in any of the Alberta or any Canada room that you go into. So you go into our Calgary or you go into our Alberta or whatever. And if you say anything that goes against the narrative, you basically get downvoted to a point where you can't even talk, if not completely removed from the conversations. But yeah, I remember, people saying, well, your house isn't, you're not using it as an investment. And it's like, well, no,
Mhm.
that's exactly what you're doing. You upkeep your home. You make it your sanctuary. You keep your property. You mow your lawn. You plant your gardens. You paint, update, and eventually it comes to a point where you can extract some of the value from that when you go to sell your house. Is the main
Mhm.
idea behind it? Not what we're seeing right now is absolutely insane. I don't know if people will be in the same situations where if they buy a starter home that's now $650,000 to $750,000, how much more value can actually come out of that once the market eventually balances out, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a scary thought, when if the market crashes and probably a matter of time. But people are going to be left in really bad positions when that happens, and things are already so tight financially, that it's hard to watch people go through this. Like, I think of Sarah Popovich. I'm not sure if you heard her presentation to City Hall, but she was a lady in Bowness who, her neighbor had owned a corner unit and had sold it to developers, and they built, I believe it was row houses there. I can't remember, but they basically towered over her property, and she wasn't able to enjoy the gardening that she used to do. And um, even if she was to do the gardening back there, she's got people overlooking. They can see into her backyard now, so that privacy is gone. And she has invested, like you said, all this time and energy and funds into her property. And I just read a tweet the other day that said she's actually going to be leaving Calgary because the blanket upzoning passed, and her property has already taken a pretty big hit, due to just, like, I think they told her that the value of her property now is only the land, because of this unit that has been built next door. And so, they say financially that buying a house is one of the biggest investments that you can make, or one of the biggest purchases that you can make. And for the left to kind of, and even the counselors down at City Hall, some of the counselors, I shouldn't say all, but, for them to treat that like that's a frivolous thing, and like it doesn't matter, and to even take it further than that and say that it's selfish for people to want privacy and access to sunlight and be able to garden and, make their house a home. It's this crazy ideology, that I kind of talked about in my speech, where they are indoctrinating people into believing that the collective should take precedence over the individual.
Yeah, instead of responsibility for our own actions, which was something that they talked about throughout
Mhm.
COVID. Actions have consequences. Now your actions of owning your own home is now subject to consequences of other people. And I think,
Mhm.
like, I didn't sit through every part of the city hall thing that was on for almost, what, 2 full weeks, right?
Yeah, it
Um,
was a lot.
it was a lot, so I couldn't sit through every presentation and pay attention too much to it. But I don't think that there was a homeowner that got out there and said, what I'd really like is, I'd really like if somebody came in and put in an eightplex right next door to me. If they found
Mhm.
one homeowner that would say that, you'd say, like, what's wrong with your head? Who wants this? And looking at the Sarah Popovich story is exactly the same thing.
Mhm.
We see that these actions do have consequences. Now this woman, instead of potentially profiting, or being able to move laterally, I just want to move away from my neighbors. My house is worth $650,000, but my land is only worth $350,000. Now I
Mhm.
can't even move laterally. And we'd seen that starting throughout COVID, where people couldn't afford to downsize because they couldn't qualify for a mortgage because the cost of the value of the properties had gone up so much, and having to
Mhm.
requalify just wasn't a thing. So I've been a number of people that, I mean, that's a different sort of thing than we're facing with the blanket rezoning. But how expensive the Liberal government has made life for Canadians, and you know, what is it? They say 50% of people under the age of 29 don't believe that they'll ever own a home right now,
Yes. Yeah.
and and so when they're drumming this in that if you do own your own property, it's not worth it. It's not an investment. You probably don't deserve it. Other people deserve to live in that land more than you do, or just as much as you
Mm.
do. Meanwhile, why? What sort of value do we get out of this? Um, and it's insane. So now you're in a different age group than I am, and what are you hearing in your circles? Like, are people genuinely worried? Are they still living at home? Are they struggling with rents? Like, I know we hear the horror stories, but what's the actual boots to the ground say to you on that, Aaron?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that that's an issue within my age group. I fall under the millennial category. So, yeah, many of us are having to move back in with our parents and or have to look at possibly renting for the rest of our lives. And it just feels like that opportunity to own a home is getting further and further away. Um, and this blanket upzoning issue in Calgary, they're selling it to us like it's going to solve the problem, but there is no actual evidence that it's going to create affordability, which is probably the biggest issue that Calgarians are facing. It's hard to watch because I feel like really good people that value living in Calgary are being pushed out of the city because it's going the way of being too expensive for anybody to be able to own here. So people are that love the city and want to stay here. Unfortunately, they're being pushed out because there's simply not that affordability being created. And the blanket upzoning is not going to fix that issue, as we have seen in Toronto and Vancouver. And it's unfortunate because they're actually, all those people from those cities that are already overwhelmed, they're coming here now. So that adds to the issue of people being pushed out. And again, um, it's not it's not fixing the root issue of demand, which is still increasing. So it doesn't matter how many houses we build, that's not going to help decrease the demand and therefore create affordability. So it's difficult to watch because I know a lot of people in my age group that feel like they're stuck, and um, rent is increasing too. And I think that's the hard part for people in my age group, is that there's no end in sight for that either, for the rent to kind of cap off. And so they're sinking all this money and getting nothing back in return. And I think that gets defeating after a while, right? You just feel like there's no hope, and so I am hearing that from a lot of people in my age group. It's stressful for them, and they're, um, we talk about population and how we need to. I mean, it's funny because they originally sold it to us that we were overpopulated, and then so people kind of um, stopped populating, and now they're going the other direction and saying that we're underpopulated. And that's another thing that is increasing this demand, right, is the mass immigration. I think my dad told me that our population now is at 1.6 million in Calgary, and so that was like I think it was like 500,000 people that came into Calgary last year. So, that's affecting the whole issue as well. And again, I feel like people who were born and raised here that do want to own homes, they're not going to have that opportunity.
Well, and that's the thing too, is we're growing population faster than we're actually able to build houses. So, I've talked to builders. I was in the industry prior to leaving, and this was just last year, and beginning of summer ish, where the builders were running flat out. They couldn't actually build houses any faster. and they had
Yeah.
possession dates on these houses that were somewhere out 2 years.
Oh,
So you're
wow.
you're waiting 2 years after purchasing a house before the builders can actually get to it. So just because you've created more land, or changed the way that we're going to look at the land inside of the city, and build in different type housing, inside of these same lots, doesn't mean that we're actually going to be building that much faster. If
Hmm.
they're the builders are already full tilt, they're not going any faster. We're not bringing in additional labor to help meet these demands.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's frustrating for Calgarians because that was kind of sold to us during the upzoning hearings from City Council, and they're not able to follow through with that. So what they had promised was that they were going to up the amount of houses that they're going to build per year. But like you said, all these trades are already maxed out. They can't follow through with that, and so it's it's frustrating on that level because you see them promising things that you know they can't deliver, and that doesn't seem to concern them. Right.
Well, and it's not that that's the only thing that doesn't seem to concern them. I think I'd read a Western Standard story today, and they're talking about permanent water restrictions. So I mean, we went through a couple of
Mhm.
months while there was snow on the ground. They were still forecasting drought for the entire province in southern Alberta. Well, that's because of 2 months of rain and snow has actually normalized. But Western Standard again reported that they want to keep us in this permanent water restrictions.
Mhm.
Well, if you're creating that many more properties on side of one living space, let's say you put in a fourplex or a sixplex. Well, now you've got four families that are bathing and washing their
Mhm.
dishes and doing their laundry. Sure, maybe they're not watering the grass 2-3 times a week, but they're going to be using the inside water, the inside facilities for 365 days a year, not just watering their lawns. So how is it that if we're going to call these permanent water restrictions, how does the demand or the additional housing on these properties, how does our infrastructure keep up?
Mhm. Absolutely. That's another thing too is the infrastructure is maxed out, and they're going to have to rip up all these neighborhoods and redo the pipes and things like that, and that is going to cause a huge headache for Calgarians. And I live in an area where they just tore up our roads like a year ago, and um, they would be doing that again. So it's frustrating to also live with this constant construction aspect of things. And in those older neighborhoods with the power lines, which is in my neighborhood, that's another aspect too, right? They've got to redo all the power lines. And um, again, with all these trades maxed out, it's creating this vicious cycle where they're not able to get ahead or be able to deliver on these promises that they're making. And it's interesting because that kind of goes back to the education thing where you know we should be pushing young people into trades because there's so much opportunity. I think it was Charlie Kirk who said there's something like 11 million jobs currently in the United States that you don't need a college or university degree to go into those fields, and a lot of those are trades. And you're not starting out 50,000, $100,000 in debt when you get out of school. And it's really interesting because I didn't know this until recently, but apparently the statistics are that only 47% of college and university graduates use their degree once they get a job. So they don't actually in a lot of cases need their degree for the job they get into. So um we I feel like the trades are something where you're going to have a lot of opportunity, you're going to be making good money, you're not going to be starting out in debt, and yet I guess people are not pushing their kids to get into that because there's a bit of a stigma with that, right? Where it's like um the college educated versus the non-college educated, there's sort of this stigma that you're not as intelligent if you didn't attend post-secondary.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's what the NDP was talking about at their Calgary rally. Is Gil McGowan just said like how many people here have a university education,
Oh,
and I'm
really?
guessing that a large majority of them stood up, and they're it's a lot government employees or they're a lot on the federal unions because I mean that's the people that support the NDP. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, they like to think that they're smarter. Okay, so you're smarter, but you're making less money. You have huge debt, and than somebody else that went to a trade school or went into a craft, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing for people to keep in mind and um, think about is that there are so many different types of intelligence too. Like there's academic intelligence, but that's different than wisdom, which is different than emotional intelligence, which is there's all these um, types of knowledge, different types of knowledge. And some of that stuff can't be taught through the education system. And really, I don't think that the education system, the biggest issue with it is that they don't want to produce critical thinkers. Um, I was kind of looking into how the education system started, and it's kind of interesting. Hang on, I'm just going to find my note here. Um, yeah, originally it had been the public education system had been introduced to create factory workers. It was during the Industrial Revolution, so they wanted people just educated enough where they could work and be functional that way. But it was never to teach people critical thinking, and that's why they say they've got things like these. Uh, the bells in school and they've got row desks and things like that, and there's an aspect of the education system where it's kind of teaching you to be like a worker bee within their system.
Interesting. And I think a lot has changed inside of the actual education system. We've moved from let's
Yes.
call it the basics of what you're talking about, and into what my generation talked about is we were taught how to think, not taught what to think.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm Generation X, and we're a pretty proud bunch. And we're a pretty tough bunch. And I think it's from
Absolutely.
like our generation that things started to go down, and I take a large part of the responsibility. I think we all should. We're the ones that basically introduced our children into you get a trophy for just showing up. So we
Mhm.
have a lot of the people that think that they're owed something, and then bring in the
Yes.
TikTok generations and the people that think that they can play games or be famous online, and that's going to earn them a paycheck. And it's a pretty serious struggle for them, and a big slap of reality when their parents are going to eventually have to say, no, listen, this isn't panning out for you, go out and get a
Yeah.
job. But what jobs do they get? So that's another actually really good topic to get into in Calgary. Like, and I'd seen conversations over the weekend about the same thing. Is that when I was growing up, I never had a problem finding a job. Like there was always a gas bar or a
Mm.
restaurant or someplace. Enough McDonald's. I had friends that worked at various jobs. A lot of those jobs now don't seem to be worked by children in the summertime. They are more so consumed by the new Canadians, we'll call them. So you go into
Yes.
these places, and it's very rare that you see a 16-year-old bussing tables or at the till, right? So
Yeah.
it's another complete shift where you can't even go out and get the basics or the understandings of what working for a paycheck means. And I'd seen that going on through COVID and thinking, how are these parents, funding their children to go out, doing whatever they were allowed to do still then, if these kids can't even get a job? Like it's incredible.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that goes back to this stigma where it's kind of like this idea that those jobs are beneath them. And even depending on what type of family you come from, they might kind of impress that upon you as well, right? But it's so important for younger people to be in jobs like that because it does teach you skills and it gives you real world experience, which I think that that's a huge issue with colleges and universities is they're not preparing these young adults for real life. They're kind of they get out there and they've spent these 4 years in this institution, and it's so far removed from real life and from reality that they get out into the real world and they're just not equipped to handle a lot of the issues that they end up facing, and part of that is because they've been coddled in the education system, and they find out that they're not necessarily that's not really the way that the real world works. Right, so they kind of enter into the workforce unprepared.
Yeah, and I think that's more socially than anything. I mean, it's whenever
Mm.
you get a new job, it's awkward. But if going back to when you had your first job, it's the most awkward thing on the planet because it's not like hanging out at school. Like somebody's really looking down on you, and you have a whole new set of rules that you have to abide by. And even just getting your first paycheck from that, you look at it, and now you start to understand what taxes are about, and it's like, wow, this sucks. I put in a lot of effort. I put in my part-time 20 hours. I put in my full-time 40 hours. And I don't even know if they still have, like a 40-hour gas bar job, or if they just keep continuously break them down into like these smaller portions. By the time you get your paycheck, you think, I did all of that for what? Like, what am I getting
Mhm.
out of this? I can't even afford nothing. I can't afford a car payment with this, or, you know,
Mhm.
and then you think, well, geez, now we're going to have to try and buy a house. How am I going to afford rent and groceries if I can't afford the things that I want to eat, if I can't even go out one night per week? And I think there's a lot of TikTok videos going on with that same thing. People like literally in their cars going, my life is just shit right now.
Mhm.
You know, they can't afford rent. They can't afford to do anything. Um, I'd seen a college girl, and she said, all of her utilities and everything are taken care of by her single mom that helps her out in paying for her education from Alberta into BC. But she goes, like, I can't afford food on a lot of days, and she goes, I can't go back to my mother and ask for more. She just doesn't have any more to give.
Oh,
So,
it's just a horrible situation that people are in. It's heartbreaking.
oh, it truly is. The state of Canada right now is terrible.
Hmm. And
And
that is another issue with the education system is that um, financial literacy is not a part of that. And so again, that's another thing that they're kind of sending young people out into the real world totally unequipped for. They don't know that they're kind of taught to put their money into savings and let it grow that way, and they're not taught about investing and the returns on stocks and bonds in comparison to like savings accounts and things like that. And even we should be teaching kids how to do taxes and trying to get the best out of that they can. And again, these kids are just totally going out into the real world not prepared, and some of them do make good salaries, but again, without that financial literacy, um, it doesn't matter how much you're making. Sometimes you see these big um, stars who will blow millions and millions of dollars, right? Because they don't know how to invest properly or how to take care of their money. And so that financial literacy aspect of things, it's such a missed opportunity to teach young people about that and to really equip them in that way for everyday life. And it frustrates me that that's not included in any of these curriculums, even in college and university. I mean, I guess you can take specific courses, but even then it's um, you know I think it should be taught to everybody as a standard across the board type of thing.
no, and I agree. We're talking about Soji, the whole sexualization of children. There's a
Mhm.
whole part of a child's growing up and understanding that not every child needs, but every child is going to be released into the real world where they are going to have to pay bills, pay taxes, where they're going to have some sort of idea of where their transactions go. So instead of focusing on what our children actually need, we're focusing on bullshit concepts. Like it's
Mhm.
and it isn't preparing people for a lot of these things. So I think and what you were saying throughout your presentation in the city of Calgary, I think one of the biggest thing that you focused on was order out of chaos. Why don't we lead into a little bit of that? Because I think the entire system is basically, it's kind of shifting everybody into that same thing. So we're starting off in the school systems, like we've just finished talking about, into these mindsets, and then into this order out of chaos, where the people that created these problems are now onboarding you to love their solutions, even though their solutions are more of the problem than they'll ever solve, and they're going to create a whole plethora of other issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And the chaos is just gonna continue. And I think it was Sun Tzu that said um, that someone will burn down their own country to rule over the ashes, type of thing. And there's that mentality on the left, right? Where it's interesting because in a way they're against the establishment, and yet um, they're kind of the people at the top of the establishment are people on the left. A lot of the people at the top pulling these strings, who are these billionaires and ultra rich people, they want to destroy that system, right? Like they say on the left, eat the rich. But you look at the top 100 Forbes, and 80 out of those are leftists, right? And they give to the Democrats, and 10 out of those maybe give to like the Republicans in the states, type of thing, right? And then 10 kind of stay out of it and don't donate at all. But it's interesting because they don't see, it's like double think, right? Where they are against the establishment that is funding them and creating and indoctrinating them, I guess is the way to say it. So they're not putting it together that um, they've got a double standard that way, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely does make sense. And we see the hypocrisy going on throughout, our politics. The left controlling the media, the liberals in power right now, co-aligned with the NDP, but NDP is really not much different. They're
No.
I wouldn't even call them liberal light anymore. They're on the same waves. What they're talking about right now is this housing crisis that was created by Harper 8 years ago. Well, no. How about if you appreciated that there was a housing crisis for Harper, you had 9 years to do something about it before you started letting
Mhm.
in millions of other people. And I'd seen a report today, and somebody was saying that they don't even know how many illegal immigrants Canada has. It's somewhere between 20,000 and 500,000. Now
Wow.
that's not 40 to 50,000. That's 20,000 on the low side to 500,000 potentially,
It's huge.
illegal immigrants. Not the people that we brought in, the people that crossed over, in the
Mhm.
Roxham border. And when they crossed over, the RCMP were playing porters. They would grab their luggage, they would drive them to the airport, they would fly them into a city, and it's like, well, why are we doing this? And now that they're
Mhm.
here, what are we doing with them? So those are additional costs on Canadians, but it's
Yeah.
just lending itself more to the issues that we're starting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And creating that chaos. And we've seen Europe is 10 years ahead of us, right? So we've seen what those mass immigration policies have done over in Europe, and that is going to come here. And it's interesting because, again, with the demand and the supply. Oh, sorry, one second here. I'm just going to shut this here. Sorry, my apologies for that.
No worries. Ice cream truck driving by.
Yeah. Somebody's weed whacking out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, finally,
Perfect timing.
we have a dry enough day that somebody can actually get out in their backyard and catch up with their lawn.
You
Um,
gotta take the opportunity.
yeah, I'd actually seen today that Malmo, Sweden, is now considered less safe than Baghdad.
Jeez.
So I
I
mean,
mean,
that's creating the problem, and I
mhm.
don't even actually see that there's any solutions that are coming out about this. So we're not talking
Yeah,
about, what are we doing about the additional crime.
yeah.
If we look at what's going on in Ontario with car thefts, I mean, it's insane. So much so that the Ontario police had come up with a recommendation to leave your car keys by your door so that your house doesn't get ransacked as well.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
what the hell kind of logic is that?
And desperate people do desperate things, and a lot of Canadians are getting into this desperate position, and I think it's frustrating to watch with the whole mass immigration thing too, because those people are being brought over here, but they don't have long-term plans, and they're getting set up with the short-term funding or housing from the government, and that they're unable to secure jobs after that. And so you end up seeing a lot of these immigrants that are now panhandling outside of grocery stores and things like that. So it's just um, Canadians are struggling to find work in some areas, let alone people like that, right? And they're, like you said, there's just no plan to slow down on that, and it's frustrating because you see that on both the conservative and the left side of things, is that they both are kind of into this mass immigration thing, which is why I like the PPC. Because he is actually somebody that's quite vocal. Max is somebody that's quite vocal about slowing that down and putting a cap on that, and maybe bringing in skilled people for the jobs that we need people to take, but kind of slowing down the process for everybody else. And it's frustrating to watch both major parties, both on the left and the right, kind of um, supporting this mass immigration that is creating this chaos.
See, and I don't think the conservatives are actually supporting the mass immigration that's creating the chaos. There are certain sections or sectors that we do need skilled people in. The liberal
Yes.
policy is to let everybody in, and even today, I'd seen that we'd upped our quota on the people we're taking in from Gaza from 1,000 to 5,000.
Oh my gosh.
And there's another 4,000 people that, I mean, we're already struggling with where are we going to put these people? Like, we have our own citizens living in
Mhm.
tent cities in the streets. We're spending $224 or 230, call it $230 a day for each one of these people to live in a hotel room and get groceries, which is a higher standard of living than what most Canadians have. You're bringing in
Yes.
more. Where's the funding going to come from? Where does the money come from? And I think for the Canadian side of things, the biggest pressures that we're seeing is that they're starting to kind of twig on to what's going on, and starting to ask the questions. Listen, who cares about my
Mhm.
family? Why do I have to continuously feed somebody else's problems?
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and the immigration thing seems to be the largest driver of what we're seeing for I'm going to say poverty in Canada. I mean, the liberal spending, that's of course raised interest rates and inflation. That's definitely a huge part of it, but a lot of it is just coming from rampant spending. And a lot of that
Mhm.
money that we're seeing that's being spent is going to people that are coming into our country from other countries. And it's not being racist, because I don't know the color of their skins. I know where some of
Mhm.
these people are coming from, definitely, and you can definitely see that there are certain neighborhoods that are predominantly more one I'll call them ethnically charged, or heavy, than what you'd see as an integration. But I mean, that's a part of the Canadian mosaic, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with legal immigration and people doing it the right way, but when they're fast tracking things the way that they are, first of all, it's a little bit scary for Canadians because they're not vetting people properly. And when you're bringing people into Canada that don't share our values or want to assimilate and potentially want to bring their own values here, and then um, they're sort of fighting for those laws to be implemented in our country. And that can be a little bit of an intimidating thing when you start to see communities like that congregating, like happened. I think it was a couple of weekends ago. There was that Kalistani parade that happened in Calgary, and I think actually Gondek went down to that. But there was a large group of them, and they are considered I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on here, but like a terrorist organization in India. And they're advocating for that here. So to see that en masse, it's a little bit scary.
No, that's it. But I mean, that's when you let in anybody and everybody as fast as you can. And again, I don't
Yes.
think that that's the conservative mandate. I think the conservative mandate is, yes, we do need to have people in, in some of the stems. In, we need to have doctors, we need to have nurses, we need to have, professionally trained. So there's a
Hmm.
large difference from, and people stood up against Smith for saying the same thing. We want, or she said, well, we want X amount of people. Um, and then what it turned out is the conversation that she had with Trudeau is no, listen, we can't take hundreds of thousands of untrained, unskilled people. We actually need skilled, trained workers. So, and it's not calling these people trash or that they have no values or that their lives aren't equal to ours. It's just, how many more unskilled, uneducated type jobs that we just talked about, the McDonald's, the working at a gas bar, those type of jobs. How many more of those can we create in order for these people to
Hmm.
actually get off of public assistance so that they can start contributing to the society that we have? And it leads into, I brought this up today. We're seeing the healthcare system in Canada collapse,
Hmm.
and a big part of that is because we have more people than our healthcare system could handle. I mean, we'd seen
Yeah.
these issues prior to COVID, and then throughout COVID. Well, I mean, the hospitals were pretty much shut down, so they could do whatever they wanted. But now that there's again another 2.5 million people that are in Canada, well, now we've increased the size of that problem without increasing the solution. And their solution is to throw more money at the same failing systems. Healthcare in Canada is a joke as
Yes.
far as I'm concerned. It's terrible. Um, that's a whole other story. Anyways, uh, so I know you've kind of thrown some ideas and stuff together here, and I want you to take off on talking about some of the things that you'd covered at City Hall, and where you want to see where you'd like to see some changes inside of Calgary or inside of Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that one major focus that we really have to combat on the front lines is the education system and getting involved. Specifically, parents getting involved with knowing what their kids are being taught. I said in my speech that Vladimir Lenin said that all you need to do, paraphrasing here, but all you need to do is basically steal a generation of kids, right? And you can change the world. So equipping parents and equipping kids with knowledge of what is being taught in schools, and unfortunately that's going to take a little bit of work on the parents part, because they're going to have to be talking to their kids and researching this stuff. One thing that's kind of interesting is, and I don't think that we think about it too much, is that how much school has an influence on children, specifically because they are spending 8 hours a day there. So that's kind of like their biggest influence overall. I mean, they've got the biggest chunk of time in a kid's day, right? And then you've got the extracurricular activities on top of that, and then the time with friends. And so really the influence that parents have on their kids is quite minimal in comparison. So um, I guess what the goal of the education system currently, because it's not like it was back, when you were growing up, or my parents were growing up, or even when I was growing up, it's just changed so much. And so I think we've really got to get back to focusing on equipping our kids with knowledge about about a lot of this stuff. And the way that we do that is, communism used to be taught in school, and I think that's something that had a major effect on me, was being introduced to that stuff in school. So I was able to look through a lens where I could kind of notice that language being used in certain material that the left is putting out, or even the right sometimes. So equipping ourselves with that knowledge so that we can have discernment when it comes to that, and be able to look at a curriculum and even say, okay, well, this is what's good about the curriculum, we should keep this, and this is what's bad about the curriculum. So we should throw it out. And another solution that I would kind of suggest is, we've got to take back and create alternatives to these education systems that we currently have, because they are not equipping kids properly with knowledge, and they're not coming out of them educated. It's kind of crazy, because you'll see these college and university educated young people, and you really notice this with being online and the access that we have to the internet now, where a lot of them don't know the difference between a possessive your and you apostrophe re, like you are, right? And a lot of these kids, and even like these English majors and stuff like that, are coming out of these institutions and not even knowing the basics. So yeah, it's I mean, that's kind of scary a little bit. So yeah, if we can get back in there and kind of look at amending these curriculums, and trying to focus on actually educating kids, then I think that is going to affect the rest of what we're kind of dealing with, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. But who should be making these calls? Should this be politicians? Should this be parents? Should this be teachers? Teachers seem to think
Mm,
that they know all, and they should have
yes.
free reign. And I'm not going to say that they're all the same. I had some amazing
Yeah.
school teachers, and well, I doubt any of them are still in their same careers. Um, I'm sure that they'd come across subjects that they didn't want to touch on, but now we
Mm,
have teachers that are flying, the whole alphabet rainbow flag inside of their classrooms, and they're actually pushing a lot more of this than the school systems are, or than
yes.
politicians are. And now it seems like they're starting to work lockstep. So the NDP and the school boards, or the liberals and the school boards, are ratcheting these ideas up. And
Hmm.
instead of it helping, again, this is order out of chaos. They're creating a problem and now trying to pour gasoline on the fire as a solution.
Yep, absolutely. And obviously there has to be some type of regulation, but I think one thing that could help with that too is bringing accountability to teachers. And kids aren't allowed to bring their politics into school. They get in trouble for that. Um, it should be the same for teachers, right? So having accountability on that level, and also um, having incentive for the really good teachers, right? I don't think that we do that enough. And so they're kind of they get paid as much as the not so good teachers, and there's not really incentive for them to be amazing teachers, right? And they do say that that's the biggest impact, that there is on kids is if they have a really, really good teacher, they tend to soak up that information. So it is really important to encourage teachers to be better at their jobs, right? And part of that too, I think there's a lot of people um, who have been pushed out on the right, like you were talking about earlier. It's harder for them to get into these positions, and that's something that we've kind of got to do on a community level. Is start if we do want to see change across Calgary and across Canada, is we've got to get involved in our local communities and programs and dealing with youth and community associations and things like that, and kind of take back some positions of power so that the left my one of my favorite podcasters, Steven Crowder, says you can't negotiate from a position of weakness. And so we've got to get back into some of those positions of power so that we can have the ability to bargain, because right now kind of a lot of the power sits in the hands of the left. And I will say that's one thing that Danielle Smith has done that's been a really good thing, is there has been a bit of a power shift that way. And I think that's been really encouraging for Albertans, because it gives us a little bit of hope that it's not all just heading in one direction, especially when we've got somebody like Trudeau at the helm internationally.
No, absolutely. And yeah, and see, one of the things that I find, and are you on Facebook? Do you do any face, like, are you a part of your community? See, there's a couple of apps. I think that, there's Facebook, and then there's another one, Next Door. And if you get onto these things, it's again, there are a lot of, I'm going to say, indoctrination. It's the same thing as what I talked about with Reddit, is they're really leftized, and these people will shout you down, and they will challenge you, and they will flood your feeds if you're saying the
Yes.
wrong thing. So I know just in my own specific community, they were looking for volunteers, and when you look at the person that's heading our our neighborhood, or our neighborhood Facebook group, or whatever it is, the community center, you can tell that she's way to the left, and like all of her pictures do nothing but scream that exact same thing. So she said, we're looking for volunteers for somebody to go out and help raise money for the community center. I said, I'd love to do that. I'm in sales, so for me walking into a business, or even for me going door to door, it's really not that big of a deal. And she said, that's great. She connected with me, seeing that everything that I post on Facebook are my Substacks, which was, the anti-vaxxer conspiracy, they call them, whatever. It was all the information that was provided by the, the provincial government or the federal government. And because she didn't get along with that, and she was still masked up long after masking was required, she'd never reached out to me to actually take on that position. So I think that they'd had their back channel talks, and it's like, oh, we definitely can't have somebody like this working with us. And it's like, do you need the money, or do you not need the money?
Exactly, right. It's so funny, the bias that they have with this stuff. And yeah, if you believe a certain thing, or you disagree with them on anything really, they will come at you. I am definitely no stranger to that. I used to do, and I still do this when there are protests, but there aren't as many happening these days. But I would go down and do lives, and the left would kind of target me and come after me and threaten me. They tried to dox me, and so they're really aggressive, and they try to shut you down, and that can be really intimidating for people. If you've got a family or young kids or something like that, it can be, you don't want to put them in a dangerous position. And that's how these people can make you feel. They've threatened to follow me home from events. And a gang of them has followed me before. So it can get dangerous really quick. And statistically, a lot of people on the left are dealing with mental health issues. So you compound that on top of the other stuff, and it just creates this really bad situation. So I think there's this fear a little bit on the right too, to speak out, because you're going to be targeted or you're going to be canceled. And you can't, I mean, it's difficult for people. You can't blame them, right?
No, because we've all gone through the same things, and doing what we're doing. We all have basically
Yes.
the same issues, and it's with the same type people. And yeah, the threats are something. But when I was on LinkedIn, when I was allowed on LinkedIn, people actually contacted my employers and my previous employers
Really?
with comments that they disagreed with, and said, "Is this something that your company promotes?" Well,
Wow.
it's not coming from the company, it's coming from me, it's on my account. But so I had to have this conversation with one of my employers, and they said, you have two options: one, you remove all your posts, or two, you remove your association with our company on there. And I said, no problem, I'll have you off in like 10 seconds. So I just basically wiped out all of my job history, on a professional network. So then all I
Wow.
got to be was just somebody that could talk on a social media platform. And so they work at
Yeah.
intimidating you. And I mean, when they start going after your job, that's pretty low. When they start threatening you or your family, that's pretty low. But that's what we're seeing inside of these communities. So the people that have somehow made it to the top in some of these communities are now the ones that are controlling the boards. So when you try and, again, even help out, they're going to keep everything to as much of their own control as possible, and you don't even get the same say. So, like I said,
Yeah.
it's really tough to break back in. And then how many parents are just going to go along to get along? They want their child to be
Mhm.
invited to all the same birthday parties, or to have friends.
Yeah.
And if you're hushed out of the group, then that's a big challenge as well, that I think that parents and children are going to be facing, just because of exactly what we're seeing. They're taking over
Yeah.
every one of these institutions that with lunacy.
Yep. And I think you bring up such a great point, where I think we need to create, not just try and fix the education system, because that may be fighting a losing battle, but creating our own institutions outside of that, so that if kids on the right have certain beliefs, they're not afraid to voice that, and that's not going to um, they're not going to be reprimanded for that, or have less opportunities because they believe a certain way. And I know that Charlie Kirk has set up an institution, and one of my favorite pastors in the U.S. has set up an institution, and medical facilities, and all sorts of things like that. And Jordan Peterson has done that in Canada as well, set up his university. So I think that if we can create alternatives to their system, then that gives us a real shot to be able to get back into positions of power, and not be within their system, right? Because ultimately, they still have control if we're still going to their institutions and still supporting their institutions, and sending our kids there. That even puts parents and kids in a difficult situation, because if it gets out that they maybe have beliefs that are a little bit more conservative, then those kids are going to be targeted throughout college or university, and sometimes even by like the professors, right? So um, yeah, I can see what you're saying, where the parents, they kind of want to acquiesce to this stuff so that their kids aren't missing out on opportunities.
Yeah, and I say this goes back to, I think, the first things that we started seeing in the education system. And it wasn't when I was going to school, but when my children were. So this had been around about the
Mhm.
same time that you were. Is the elimination of Christmas carols, or those sorts of celebrations. And these were inside of the public schools, so we couldn't have a
Yeah.
Christmas concert at school anymore. And the other thing is peanuts. Nobody was allowed to bring anything with peanuts, no peanut containing
Yes.
foods into schools. And my wife had worked in the lunchroom program where my oldest boy was going to school. And uh, so they had to go through all the training, and everybody was told you can't bring peanuts to school. And I was upset by that, because growing up, what child doesn't pack a peanut butter and jam sandwich or a peanut butter sandwich to school? And I'm not going to say that it's,
Right.
make the case that it's a healthy food option, but for parents that are struggling, it's a great food option, and it's something to put
Yeah.
into your child. And if you can't pack them, that little bit of protein in a peanut or a
Mhm.
candy bar or whatever, then it turns into a situation where we're catering to nobody, because inside of the lunchroom program there were literally zero children that had a peanut allergy, yet 100% of all the children at that school were not allowed to bring a peanut containing food into the school. What the fuck are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and it's interesting too. I mean, it makes you wonder, and this is a whole nother subject, but it where these allergies started coming from, because it never used to be like that. Nobody had peanut allergies, at least not on the level that they do today. So it's like almost become an epidemic in a way, and it's just even things like that make you question, like, what has changed to make this even an issue today, right?
That's a whole other conversation. I can go on for like 12
It is.
hours on diet and nutrition alone, and basically what we've done to our bodies.
Yes.
But again, I think it's the catering to the smaller minorities. And I mean, if you're not going to go along, if you're not going to be one of those people that has to love everybody and treat everybody incredibly well, then you can't have conversation, you can't have discourse, you can't have true
Mhm.
discussions. You're going
Mhm.
along to get along, and then that's again why we see some parents standing up and saying, well, no, I want my children to be able to keep secrets from me by just telling their teacher, and their teacher never having to disclose their thoughts on sexuality. Well, no, that's wrong. Parents need to
Mhm.
be included in their children's lives. They need to be there to assist them. And not everybody has the ability or the capability of homeschooling. And that's the
Mhm.
unfortunate thing about it. Um, I don't consider myself a mental midget, but I'm not a rock star. But could I sit with? It'd be my grandchildren right now. I don't think I could have sat with my boys and taught them.
Mhm.
And so I know that it's not always the same availability, or like I said, by capability, an option. But now
Mhm.
our children are, or like I said, my grandchildren are now going into schools, and they're having to deal with principals um, that don't get along with society, with stuff that doesn't make sense. And I struggle as a
Mhm.
grandparent with that. But then
Yeah.
at the same time, then I have my children saying to me, "Don't say anything, Dad. Just leave it alone." They go along to get along. They don't want to see the fights and that going on, right? And it's like,
Yes.
well, if you're not going to stand up for our our family, then I've got to.
Mhm.
And when we've seen how that happened with the vaccinations, they started off with, we're all in this together. Take your jab to save somebody else's life, right?
Yep.
It was this huge compassion thing. And then when so many of us just said, no, we're not doing it, then that's when they decided to get mean. And we've seen how mean they could actually get. I mean,
Yep.
that whole level of let the unvaccinated die. Let's triage them different in the hospitals. Let's fire them from their jobs, refuse them employment insurance. And when you've seen those things coming out, let's let's go after them. It was like, what
Mhm.
is going on? And it's just people going along to get along that ramped up so far and so fast that now we almost had mobs in the streets, right?
Mhm. And unfortunately, I do think that that's a mentality that's kind of pushed on kids in school, um, is to go along, to get along. Don't be an individual. Don't stand out. You want to be a part of the group. You don't want to swim upstream when everyone else is going the other way, type of thing, right? And it's that idea is kind of sold to kids throughout school. And again, I think that might be part of why they have kids in school for 8 hours a day, right? Because it's kind of teaching them how to submit to authority in a way. And even some of this higher education stuff, and this can kind of go back to the COVID thing, even with doctors, where, they spend 7 years in school kind of regurgitating this information, and they're taught to submit to their superiors. So I think that they were kind of upset during COVID when a bunch of us didn't just trust them blindly, right? And they're kind of like, well, we had to spend 7 years submitting to authority, and now we've got the authority, and you little peons are not submitting to us, type of thing, right? It almost becomes about control. And not everybody's like that, right? But certainly once COVID hit and kind of the unvaccinated doctors and nurses were pushed out, that's who is left to care for us in the medical system. And that's kind of a scary thought when they wanted us to die. If we were unvaccinated, they didn't want to allow us into the hospital for medical care. And that's crazy that it's a life or death situation, and they're willing to treat other people like that. The party of tolerance, right?
Yeah, the party of acceptance. But we're only going to accept people that associate under these letters, and then we're only going to accept people that follow us to the
Comply.
absolute, that comply. It's all about compliance. Yeah, and I think I still had. No, I don't have that on the bottom of my Substack, but it was compliance got us here. Complacency keeps us here. And so many of us got beaten down so badly that just do whatever the fuck you want, man, and leave me alone. And they go along with it. People aren't wearing masks. I mean, there wasn't a lot of us that were brave enough to just finally start going into stores while the mask mandates were on and say, no, I'm not wearing this piece of shit on my face anymore. I can't breathe. I can't hear you. I can't have a discussion.
Oh man.
And to me, even in part of that, the most ludicrous thing was the unvaccinated couldn't eat and sit at a table at a food court in the shopping mall at Christmas time if they weren't vaccinated, but the vaccinated could. So you see all these people standing up, wearing masks, eating in the food court, and then there's a few small families or whatever that are sitting down eating, and it's like this is so stupid. I couldn't even believe what I was saying.
Oh, it was just nonsensical. And my favorite was when you had to walk through the restaurant with a mask on, but then take it off once you're seated at the table, as if like COVID is so intelligent that it knows once you take your mask off and it's going to attack.
Or how you had to be vaccinated to go into a restaurant unless you worked in the restaurant.
Yes. Like it's nonsensical. And I guess that's what bothered me ultimately. It's like, okay, if this stuff makes sense, then I would consider complying, but none of it makes any sense. And it's just about control and seeing whether you can get people to comply or not. And unfortunately, the majority did.
and complied on the stupidest stuff, the arrows on the floor, and you go back and you see some of the pictures where people were in a park doing their outside workouts, and they had hula hoops around these like little yoga things so that you're spaced out far enough. Limiting people at funerals, like all of the things that they did, capacity limits inside of stores. I remember lining up for Costco. There's like 60, 70 people ahead of you just to get into Costco because they changed the capacity limits. Meanwhile, you're in a freaking warehouse. There was no actual studies conducted to say that, if we pack up a warehouse with people breathing, that it's going to be safer if we have 50 people or 100 people. There's just no science behind that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And they're sitting there saying, trust the science. And we're sitting here questioning and being like, well, what science?
Yeah. Well, you're a denier. So, and even given getting back into the city talking about having this permanent water restriction on, This permanent water restriction is going to do absolutely nothing. But what it's going to do is it's going to drive the climate narrative. So they're using it in the same way that they used masks and mandates and lockdowns,
Yeah.
saying you need to comply because the climate is changing. Well, is the climate changing that much, or did we just have a dry
Mhm.
season last season? And now that we know that water levels are back to normal, they're going to keep telling us they're not. Just like the last year when it was the planet was boiling, when we in Alberta, for the most part, had a below average seasonal summer. No, the planet's not boiling. And no, you're not going to convince me of this. And if there is one spot in the ocean that's hotter, then what? The conversation on climate to me is incredible, because they're not talking about
Mhm.
the temperatures actually getting hotter. They're talking about the median temperature getting warmer. It's the median, which means we've lived below that. We've lived well above it. Inside of Canada, we can swing from -40 to +40, 80
Mhm.
degrees, and they're worried about zero shifting to one.
It's so ridiculous. And again, we trust the science. Well, the science that they were selling us, when you were growing up, what was it that they said, that there was going to be another ice age, was it? And then they flipped it and said all of the icebergs were going to be melted. And it's like, I do believe that there is climate change, but the question is how much of it is man-made, right? Is this natural climate change? Yeah, because I mean, I would agree with that. Like, the climate is always changing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's man-made, right? And again, that goes back to the indoctrination that's pushed in school. That is a massive thing that they push on people through the education system, is the whole climate hoax, as I call it.
No, absolutely. And they continue to drive that narrative because they have nothing else to talk about. They're not actually fixing any problems. They're not making anybody's
Yeah.
life more affordable. Our life is definitely not safe. Cities are being overrun by addicts, tent cities,
Mhm.
homeless people. Our safety is gone. We need to be building more prisons in addition to building more healthcare
Mhm.
facilities. But then we also need the people that are going to be able to run these things, and in a way that's responsible to the people that are actually paying them to do these jobs, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I mean, it's so tough because it's getting harder and harder to find people to take those jobs, because everybody kind of wants, like, the Harvard kid, right? Or um the one who's got the degrees, and they're pushing them into these areas of education where they're not going to necessarily come out of it with a great job, and they're going to be possibly 50,000, $100,000 in debt, right? And yeah, it's just it's tragic. It's really tragic. And again, they're creating that chaos, and we're kind of having to deal with the fallout. And it's nice to be able to kind of discuss some solutions, and some really great people out there have some fantastic ideas on how we can combat this stuff. And one nice thing about the hearings is that it woke a lot of people up. I mean, that's the most engaged that Calgary has ever been in a hearing before. So to see that level of engagement is really, really encouraging. And it gives me hope that maybe with some of these great ideas that people have, we can start implementing those and see the pendulum start swinging the other way.
And for the city hall thing, do you think that the recall Gondek vote had anything to do with how many people showed up, or do you think that that's just because we were refused to be given a plebiscite on that? What do you think was the bigger
Mm.
influencer, or was it a combination?
Yeah, I definitely think combination. I think, yeah, some people were frustrated that it didn't go to a plebiscite. But I actually think a lot of people didn't hear about that, or wouldn't have known about that, if it weren't for the Recall Gondet groups that exist. because I didn't know about the blanket upzoning that was happening, and so that was new to me, and I learned a whole lot during those hearings. Because I had no idea that this stuff was going on, at least to this level. I had some idea, but not to the extent that it was. So I think that the connections that were made through the recall Gondek petition um, allowed us to share that information so that more people were able to engage and write in and then show up for the hearings as well. So yeah, I think that really contributed to it. And then I think there was that when people found that out, that they weren't given a plebiscite and that the councillors voted no and then voted no again to that, the frustration is just mounting. So yeah, I'm kind of excited for what comes next because Calgarians are fired up and it's good. We need that.
Well, I think a big part of it is you're right, is we're now a lot more connected. So
Yes.
whether it's the legacy media didn't really talk too much about this. And I mean, it was good for guys like Dan McLean who could go on to, Twitter and say something against it.
Mhm.
And I think he does a decent enough job in trying to keep constituents informed. Not that I know a lot of the other city councilors, but, I think he's done a good job on that. But I mean, when you get connected inside of these circles and, you're in a lot of the same circles that I am, we talk and we blow things
Mhm.
up. We want to extend these conversations. I mean, much the reason that I'm doing these things right now. You had some
Totally.
great topics of conversation and people wanted to hear more of your voice. So I mean,
Mm.
that's it. So you've been a part of the recall Gondek. You've been a part of the city hall for the blanket rezoning. You've also taken some time and been down to the carbon tax, axe the tax protests too, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
And those are still going on, right?
They are, yes. I actually haven't been to the one that's close to Cochrane for a few weeks. It's due time I go and visit that. But yeah, I was down there for a few different events that they were putting on down there, and that was awesome. Again, you get to connect with so many people at events like that, and it's great to be able to see some old friends and then meet some new friends too. But yeah, that they've got petitions down there. They've got a few different locations as well. I know there's still one going at the Lloydminster location, and then there's also one in Lacombe as well, which I was at a couple of weekends ago. They had a little get together, so it was good, and it's great that they've got the petition there that you can sign to kind of combat the carbon tax thing, because that's something that is really affecting Canadians. And you hear from the left that it only went up 23% or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, it only translates to like 3 cents on your gas bill or whatever. But that affects everything. First of all, not just your gas bill, that affects transportation costs, for truckers, and all of that stuff is going to go up because of that. um, but yeah, sorry, I've got a busy household over here. Distraction. um Sorry about that.
No, not a problem.
I lost my train of thought there.
No, yeah, no. The carbon tax does have an impact on everything. So
Yeah.
just people don't think about the climate inside of a store. So in the summertime they have to cool it off. That takes energy. In the wintertime they have to heat it up. That takes energy.
Yeah.
The freezers, the produce, all these things that and then delivery, transport of the goods, the manufacturing of the goods. If the cost of every step in the process goes up, then that means the cost of the final product is going to go up in proportion, right?
Yeah.
And again, one of those things that they created the chaos in the grocery stores on the cost of food items. We see 2
Yes.
million people per month lining up at the food banks. The food banks came out and gave the government of Canada a D minus on what they were able to accomplish, for affordability. And what are these guys doing? Instead of acknowledging that yeah, the climate tax that does absolutely nothing but make people's lives more expensive is what's causing this. They blame the grocers. So they go after
Yeah.
Superstore, which, and I don't know where you shop, but and for me, I go to Walmart because I take somebody shopping there. But I rarely buy anything there because I don't like the look of the goods, and I'm mostly meat, so I'm not a big fan of the
Mm.
meat section there. But I do buy from Superstore and from Costco. So, in these places, marginal difference in prices. Why aren't they going after all the grocers? Why are they singling out the one?
That's a great point.
They have
Yeah.
to create an enemy. So you have to have the face of the bad guy.
Mm.
And Galen Weston is that face. I mean, he's the most meek and mild mannered looking guy on the planet. Um,
Totally.
but one of the things is he did get caught in the bread price fixing thing a number of years ago. So that makes him
Mm.
a bit of an ass. But it's not like the governments aren't doing the same thing with what dairy, eggs, and chicken, right?
Yes.
They basically control the prices on those things, and to the point where farmers are losing product or throwing product out instead of being
Yeah.
able to market it for cheaper. So who's really doing the price fixing here? And
Yeah.
if we're to be honest, what's actually causing the increased costs of product? And now that they're going to talk about going to potentially a universal basic income, can you imagine what Canadians are going
Yes.
to be paying for their groceries with that?
Oh my gosh, it's just it's out of control. And another thing where there's just no end or no solution to it in sight. And in regards to the carbon tax, yeah, it maybe only went up a certain amount this year, but that is supposed to go up every single year until 2030, right? So that increase overall ends up being quite large. And yeah, again, I mean, they've almost created like this milk and egg cartel, you know, and we've seen the prices of those things skyrocket. And you look at prices, even just pre-COVID prices of groceries in comparison to today, and it's almost hard to look at because the prices have jumped like 100%, 200%, 400% in some cases. And it's just mind-blowing that we've gone so far down that path so quickly. And like you mentioned, they're not creating enough jobs to make up for that. And then you've got the mass immigration on top of that, and it's like just all of these things compounding to create this situation where I almost think that it's a little bit on purpose. And I mean, of course, right, but so that they can put us into a position where we're begging for somebody to come and rescue us, somebody like Klaus Schwab, who wants to introduce you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. But potentially the situation that they're going to create for us leading up to that is going to be so dire that it's going to make Agenda 2030 look like paradise, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Well, he just recently stepped down or something, didn't he, from the
Yes.
WEF?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's a lot like Trudeau, where nobody actually believes that Trudeau's pulling any of the strings in Canada. So
Hmm.
there is this control force that's behind him. He's just the face of it.
Absolutely.
And one of the most egregious pricks on the entire planet to boot. The smugness is what really takes it. But his ability to lie, to stand up and bold-faced lie on a day-to-day basis, or conflate, or it's just lies. He's just a terrible fucking person. That's all I can say
Yes.
about Trudeau.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. What do they call him? Castro Jr.
yeah, and even if you didn't know that, there's a large potential that he could be Castro's kid, you'd still guess it because I mean
Yeah.
he's literally driving this, and it's taken 10 years, not even a decade, to flip
Right.
Canada on its ears. And when you're talking about the prices, when you say we see these things go up 100, 200, 400%, I'm at that age where I go into a gas station and I look at a bottle of pop for $5 and I go, there's just no fucking way am I going to pay $5 for a bottle of pop. When
Same.
I bought a pop, when I was a kid, it's 25 cents. But even when I was in school, like it topped out at $1, and now you're
Yeah.
seeing like whether it's a liter and a half or whatever. Sure, it says 3.89 on it, but by the time you get it to the till and they charge you the deposit and tax, and then there's like 9 different things that they add to a can or a case of pop these days, and it turns into a $5 bill. And to me, that's just it's
Mhm.
insane. And then sure, this has gone on, but now I'm actually hitting that point with actual groceries. When it comes down
Mhm.
to buying fruits or whatever, for my granddaughters when they come over, the grandchildren. When I'm making the decision of, am I going to buy 1 or 2 items, with having to feed the rest of the family, where it used to be, okay, I can get some of these, they're on sale. I can get some of these, they're on sale. And then you look at, the package of uh, one package of berries now cost me what it used to cost to buy 2. So now
Mhm.
it's basically reduced their selection down. And I mean, even the little bit that we talked about, what's happening to people. Well, people can't afford good, nutritious foods anymore, and they're forced into eating trash.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Not only are the prices of products increasing, but also the sizes of the products themselves are decreasing. So, you're paying more and getting less than than what you would before. So there's this kind of this double whammy that's happening. And um, hyperinflation is a scary thing. You can look at countries like I believe it was Zimbabwe in the 90s, where their inflation got so high that this one woman had to use her entire life savings. I think it was $200,000 that she had to spend on one bag of groceries because that's how bad it was. But she had to, otherwise her family would have starved, right? And I feel like we're heading towards that. And um yeah, it's a little scary.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate that when my children were at home, um, it wasn't this bad. They'd
Yes.
moved out after Trudeau was elected, or sorry, just before Trudeau was elected is when my children left. And I mean, things started to get, a lot more expensive. But we used to go to
Mhm.
Superstore and buy this, what was called then a family pack. And it was more hamburger than the 4 of us could eat. So there was always leftovers. Their family pack, and it was about 20, $25, top side $25. Now you get half as much of that. They still call it a family pack, and you're still paying 20, $25. And it's like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is just, that's hamburger, right?
Yeah.
And you go look through the steaks and you see a package of steaks, and it's like, wow, the steaks are only like 25 or $30, and there's 2 steaks in the pack. And then you look at it, and well, you could read the newspaper through them.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it's
totally. Well, and that's the thing, like the quality of everything has gone down, and they're putting all of this stuff in our food, like God knows what, including bugs, right? It's like, it's getting harder and harder, like you said, to afford nutritious food. And that is so important because it your body requires that for it to be fueled. And when you don't have access to proper nutrition, then you can't function to the best of your abilities. And I think that's what they want, right? They want you to be tired all the time and not be able to just they want you to have to rely on them, right? Rely on their medical care system. And so it's kind of like this cycle that they get you into, where the same thing, where they're creating the problem, right? They're filling you full of all these foods that create cancers, and then offering you the treatment for these cancers. Right.
telling you how much more money needs to go towards healthcare spending because of cancer.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all the same thing. When they started promoting obesity as being healthy, you knew that we were taking a shift in the wrong direction for sure.
Oh man. Man, that's the thing. Well, and I mean, the left loves to say that that it's about quote unquote fat shaming, right? But it's like, no, these people are their life expectancy is going down. You know, a lot of these people that are obese, they're going to have severe health problems, and their life expectancy is so shortened, and so there are consequences for that. And I guess what the left is taught to do, and even through the education system, is to train activists, right? It's not necessarily about educating them, but training these activists um, that use things like Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. And I think they actually repackaged that kind of for the newer generation. And it's called Beautiful Trouble is the name of the book. But it kind of walks these people through steps on how to intimidate people on the right, and to kind of get them to shut down, and so that they won't fight back. And so I think one important thing that the right can do to kind of equip themselves against this stuff is to familiarize ourselves with their literature and their rules for radicals, so that you can know the tactics that they are using, and you don't get distracted into reacting. Because sometimes you can have a poor reaction and then they'll just run with that, right? It's like they're kind of waiting for an opportunity for you to do that. So if you can kind of pinpoint the techniques or the tactics that they're using, and focus on discrediting, like calling out those tactics. Maybe it's gaslighting, maybe it's deflecting, maybe it's ad hominem attacks or whatever, right? But being able to call that out, and kind of keep them on the subject matter, is a very effective tool to deal with the left. So if we can kind of equip young people, and really everybody, in my age group too, there's a lot of people that you even use these rules for radicals coming out of college and university, and they don't even know they're doing it. And that kind of speaks to the brainwashing, right? But if we can equip people on the right and show them this literature, and hey, these are the tactics, and they know how to discern those, then we've got a chance to kind of combat it, if that makes sense.
Well, to a certain extent, but like if you look at what the Federals are working on right now, and it's the Federals and the Liberals and the NDP, is that like the new investments that we've made into batteries that nobody wants for cars that nobody can afford, they've made them union, and the entire federal government are basically union employees.
Mm.
So they continue on with and there's a lot of talk about it even just today, the anti-scab legislation that's gone through. And I don't think everybody gets kind of an idea of what's going on. But last week, there was a big hoo-ha with federal employees having to go to work inside of an actual workplace for 3 days a week instead of 2. And they were all losing their minds. They're ready to walk out because they have to go to work. I mean, sure, they did their jobs from home, but when you're told that you have to go into work, you have to go into work. But now they're protesting against this. And when you see these unions protesting for having to go to work for third day, you're on the taxpayers' dime here, people. You don't get to call the shots. The unions have taken too much control. So we're seeing the indoctrination happening at the grade school levels into the universities. And then when people get out, if they want to work for the government, they have to go into the unions. Now, the anti-scab legislation, and I didn't know much about this until I started digging into it. But if there's a union shop, whether you want to be a part of the union or not, you still have to pay union dues. You get nothing for it. What the new anti-scab legislation is it means that if you're not a part of the union, despite the fact that you're paying union dues, if the union goes on strike, the employer is not allowed to let you in to do your job. So you just want to be left alone to do your job. but
Yeah.
they extort your union dues out of you. And then when they decide to go on strike, then you're without a job too.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, it's just like the level of control is it's just unfair, and it unfortunately forces people to submit.
That's it. You have to get along, or give in to get along.
Yes. Yeah.
Get along for the sake of getting along. Yes, I want to keep my job. Yes, I'm not going to talk at the water cooler. Yes, okay, pride. Yes, I'll put my pronouns in my email address. How many corporate companies or national companies, international companies, are actually forcing pronouns into their employees' bios or into their email signatures? Like, to me, that, like, it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, yep, and that's a great point too, is that now, I mean, it's not just in the education system. We see that transferring into the workplace too, just even with the DEI training, right? And you have to take that, and I'm taking a course in school right now, and even that's a part of it, right? And it's interesting how that's become mainstream. And so it's again, it's that same thing where you have to go along to get along, because if you speak out against that, or have an issue with the DEI training, then it makes it look like you're not a team player, right? And you're
Yeah,
going to not have as many opportunities per se as the person who is going, getting along to go along.
yeah. They band up, and if you're the odd guy out, then we'll make it uncomfortable for you. We'll call you names.
Yeah.
You're not a part of the cool kids. You can't sit at our lunch table. No, we're going out on the weekend, but you're not invited. And you talked in the beginning about going into homeschooling, and you said that there was some bullying that was going on inside of the school systems that was a concern for you. But I mean, we're seeing this exact same thing, this exact same bullying coming out, only they're doing it under the guise of equity instead of equality,
Yes. Yeah.
and they're bullying people with labels and
Yeah.
terms, and it's nothing short of the same thing. It's 100% bullying.
Which is ironic, because they are the ones who don't want to be labeled.
Yeah, yeah, and they
Yeah.
come up with all the labels.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I'm a firm believer in reciprocity, right? So you get what you give. And if I'm giving everything and you're not willing to reciprocate that, then that's not a healthy exchange, and I'm not going to engage in that, right? So yeah, you kind of have to, yeah, protect yourself that way, I guess.
So, what do you see going forward here? Conservatives are obviously going to win the next election unless we see this mass immigration or mass naturalization of citizens going through. Right? They want to fast track the process for citizenship. And even then, they've still only got a couple million. I mean, the Conservatives have an outstanding lead right now. But,
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you see between now and the next federal election? What do you see between now and the next provincial election? Let's even go into municipal. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
we've heated some stuff up. We've heated some Calgarians up. But even still, in doing that, there still seems to be a lot of support for Nenshi,
Mm.
in the NDP side of things. There's now more NDP support inside of Calgary than there is in Edmonton, which seems odd.
Oh, wow.
Is what I'd heard, and that's a big thing. So, like, what do you see moving forward? Let's start off with municipally, move into provincially, and then go into what are we facing in the next 500 plus days to the next federal election.
Oh yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. I think municipally, hopefully, what happens is we have some opportunities to hold these counselors accountable over the next 14 months or whatever it is, something close to that. But yeah, I mean that, and hopefully it's going to get Calgarians out to the polls and actually voting in the next municipal election, because that's, I think, one of the issues that has kind of gotten us into this position in the first place is that we had the lowest voter turnout of any municipal election in the previous election. So just getting people out and getting Calgarians engaged and actually voting is important, and it's really going to determine whoever we get in next. That's really going to determine the direction of our city going forward. So it's a pretty big deal, right? And it's a pretty big year for even Canada. And it'll be interesting to see what happens provincially with the NDP. And I think that some of that's going to depend on what the UCP does over the next little while, to see how their support gains or possibly wanes. And I think that is going to be an interesting battle, especially as we have more people moving to Calgary from these sort of more progressive cities like Toronto and Vancouver. I think that's going to be an interesting provincial election, the next one for sure. And then heading into nationally, I mean, of course, that's kind of the biggest one of all. And I guess, I mean, I think you're a little bit of a leaning towards the UCP. I don't know how you vote, but my feeling about the UCP is just that they potentially have the same goal as liberals. They just have a different way of going about it, and they typically do it slower. So it'll kind of give you this illusion of choice between the two directions, but they ultimately end up in the same place. And so I don't know your feeling on that, or if you disagree, but it would be interesting to kind of hear your opinion on that.
When it comes down to on the political side of things, I'm always going to tend towards a more conservative party. In
Right.
in and I'm never going to have a really great time with any party that believes that they're more entitled to more of my paycheck than I am. So, the problem with our politics right now, and I think the reason that you're talking about voter apathy is because people don't feel like they have a voice. So we've gone so tribal, you're either left or you're right. And, there's not a lot of places that will have both a liberal and an NDP and a conservative candidate inside of those areas. So it'll be either liberal or NDP, or it'll be liberal or conservative versus NDP. But it's going to be people that are kind of siding towards those things. Now, the media has been fantastic at influencing this thing. The unions have spent millions of dollars in shifting our elections, municipally, provincially, and federally, through their campaigns and through the media, through their advertising. The fear and the smear that went out for the provincial election by the NDP, the last one, was they were able to swing 11 seats. Now, when we see this, it starts off, I believe it starts off at the municipal level, in people's backyards, so to speak, right? So when we seen that the city council was infiltrated by the same union-sponsored candidates, it's starting to, we started to go a lot more left. Nenshi originally came on, said he's, fundamentally a conservative, which was a total lie. He wasn't. Yeah. So, once he kind of got in place, then we started to see the lefting of Calgary. And then when we start to see the lefting of Calgary, then on the provincial level, then we start to see it on a more provincial level. And then now we even have on the federal level, we have, one liberal MP inside of Calgary. So that's happening with a couple of different things. It's the immigration thing that we're seeing going on. And I think that that's also a part of what we're going to start to see happening because of blanket zoning.
Mm-hmm.
So when you attract a lower income population into, a conservative neighborhood, now you're splitting. You're actually starting to orange neighborhoods that are traditionally blue because you've now
Yes,
changed the core population inside of those constituencies, right?
absolutely.
So it's I mean, it's very complicated, but like
It is.
I think what needs to happen is we need to have a lot more of these conversations with people
Mm.
like you, people like me, people that are paying attention, that are watching, people that want to come on and just say, what they're thinking. Because a lot of people have been shut down for so long that they don't feel like they have their voice. And again, that's the reason that I've kind of done this heartbeat idea. It's just, everybody's been so gracious to give me this wonderful platform.
Mhm.
You were out at the garage when we went out in Calgary, came out for some drinks with us, and it was amazing. We went out and did that again in Edmonton. And it was just people wanting to reconnect with others of like mind. And I think
Yeah.
what we need to do is I think we just need to continuously have more and more conversations. And I think we need to do a lot of the things that you're talking about. Start taking back those boards. And if we can't take back those boards, then we have to start creating
Yes.
our own communities that will allow for that to happen.
Yeah, and here's the thing too is that I came across this information not too long ago. I can't remember who said it, but the information stuck with me, which was um, if you are, if you are talented in an area or good at something, figure out how you can use that to contribute to your community or to your municipality and get involved somehow and do what you're good at. You don't necessarily have to go outside of your comfort zone, but just get involved. And if you're really not into being a leader or kind of even taking that role on, then find somebody that you can back. Find somebody that is willing to be a leader and is willing to take on that role and get involved and try and back them as much as possible. And I think if we can do that, then we will start to see some real change in our communities.
And that's it. We actually have to reform as communities. We got to get outside of the circles that want to shut us down, and we want to be able to have the conversations that we feel are important. And I think it's
Yeah.
inside of those things that we'll share the ideas that are going to make sense in order to take home, take to
Yeah.
our homes and start to take back our communities. I mean, the whole take back, whatever. I think what needs to be taken back is democracy. Because I think that there's been
Yes.
so much lost on that. That like again, when we see the voter apathy of where it was at. And I mean, for the last municipal election, like it was cold out. Like it was really friggin' cold. I remember that one. Um, so I can imagine that there wasn't as big of a voter turnout for that last one, how on how Gondek won. And I remember standing outside, and I had one of my neighbors, great friend of the family, Gail. So she came out, and like I had to give her my gloves because it was that cold outside. And we were standing outside for like 20 minutes. So it was like, come on,
Oh
guys, you got to start.
man.
Let's get a little bit better at this process. We're going into a school that hosts hundreds of children. You got 60 people, 80 people lined up outside for what? Figure it out.
Hmm. Yeah, like how many elections have we had? Can we not streamline this process?
Yeah. Well, and I'm afraid of the streamlining that they're wanting to do, because it was, what was it, in the last provincial election, if you didn't have your ID with you, as long as somebody that did have their ID with them could vouch for
Right.
you, you could vote.
Yeah.
That's a streamlined process. So is online voting, so is mail-in voting. But the streamlines that we need to see, I don't think are inside of those processes.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. I agree with that.
It's
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
crazy where we go with these ideas, right? You want control.
Mhm.
You want control like Bill 20 offers, but you don't want the country to have control like Bill 20 offers, right? That's the new one that's out by the
Yeah.
UCP that they just passed.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I have zero problems with it because it really doesn't have a huge impact on anything, but it does have the optics of oversight.
Mm.
Um, and when we look at if we had Notley in with those same sets of rules, would we be
Yes.
as happy? And we 10 out of 10 wouldn't, because those are the type
Yeah.
of rules that they can change whatever they want. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
The thing about it is when the conservatives put it in play, it's because they may not plan to use it, but they want to have that back door.
Yeah.
When the liberals put it in play, it's because it's of malicious intent. But for the most part, if you see everything that Trudeau has done, he's like the Teflon Don. Nothing that he's said, nothing that he's done, no rules that he's broken. He can come down on a province. He can change the rules for, no carbon tax on heating for the maritime provinces where they need voters, while
Mm,
punishing the rest of Canada. He'll just do whatever he wants anyways. Whereas the conservatives will actually put it into legislation. So, like I said, it seems like it could have the optics of overreach, but I believe it's done in the spirit of preservation of democracy.
mm-hmm. Yep. And yeah, I mean, oh, it's such a, I mean, I go back and forth on that one, right? But hopefully that it turns out okay. And yeah, I guess it will depend on who is in government next, right? Because the NDP, I could see them taking some liberties with that for sure.
Well, part of it was to partyize the municipal candidates, right? So now they have to actually say their
Mm,
political affiliations, which I think is good,
yeah.
because they should. And then it also limits the amount of donations that can be given, to specific candidates by unions. So it's helped
Mm,
balance out some of the things that we see that has shifted our municipal elections and our provincial, for that matter.
mm,
So it's addressed some of those issues, and then it's put in that one portion that nobody likes, is that if and everybody blows it out of proportion, where if the provincial government doesn't like what the municipal governments are doing, they can just go in and fire them all, or
mm,
cancel out new bills. And that's not it. I mean, there has to be something that will instill it, from what I
yeah.
believe is the conservative intent. I don't give the same uh, allowances for what we'd see from the other side. I believe that
Hmm.
they would use that to their advantage. They would use it to change elections. We have seen how they, no matter how many rules you put in place, they can bypass them. It takes them one election cycle before they can do whatever the fuck they want, anyways.
Yeah, yep. Well, and oh my gosh, that's so true. Like even on a federal level with Trudeau, like I mean, like you said, it hasn't taken him that long to do what he's done to Canada and totally change the country. And um, that's it's nice about Bill 20 is that it is kind of bringing a little bit of that democracy, like you talked about, back into things. And I do like that aspect of it.
Yeah. We're coming on about 2 hours. Do you have any final thoughts?
Um, I guess, yeah. I would just say that just reiterate the point that it's important for us to educate ourselves and then also our kids about these indoctrination tactics that they're using to manipulate young minds and kind of turn them into useful idiots. So if I could recommend maybe a couple of books for people to look into. Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky would be a fantastic one. You don't even necessarily have to read the book. I do think it is free online, but you can, at the very least, just look up the rules for radicals and familiarize yourself with those. And for anybody that's like us that has had interactions with people on the left, you will recognize the tactics that they're talking about and how often they are used. The other book I would recommend for people to kind of get educated about this stuff and how they can equip themselves with knowledge would be The Marxification of Education by, oh, now I'm totally blanking on his name, Dr. James Lindsay. I believe you can find that one on Amazon, and he's got a bunch of lectures on YouTube too that are fantastic, and they go into the indoctrination that's happening in schools. And So yeah, if people want to look into that and kind of get the ball rolling that way, I think that's a really good start for us to help combat this.
And you're going to remain active in these communities, I'm guessing, in standing up. I know I've already talked to you about others that have reached out to me. So you
Yes.
are Freedom for All Time. So freedom with the number four all time on Twitter. Is there
Yeah.
any other place that you can be found?
I can also be found on TikTok at Erin Gibson 007 is my name on there. And I cover live protests. So if there's anything going on in and around Calgary, then I do lives down there. So people can catch the action that way.
And because I've had other people reach out to me, if anybody else wants to reach you and they come through me, is it okay if I share your information again with them? I just want to make sure because
Absolutely. Yes, yes, absolutely. I would I'm on board with helping any way that I can and getting involved in any way that I can and possibly just even encouraging others to and give them some ideas of how they can get involved as well. So yes, I would appreciate if you would pass that information on. That'd be great.
perfect. Well, again, I think it's absolutely fantastic that we have somebody inside of the millennials that's actually standing up, and I think that you will make a great leader inside of these circles because
Um,
you're already doing that. You've got people my age and older that are on board with what you're saying. Believe you're a good speaker and definitely a credit to homeschooling in the communities that you were raised in. So, Erin, thanks a lot for taking some time with me this evening. I'm sure everybody enjoyed our conversation.
yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sheldon. This was an absolute blast, and I appreciate your time.
All right. You have yourself a good night.
Awesome. You as well. Thank you again, Sheldon.
Bye bye.
Bye.